The wine was her choice, 2005 Chateau Pichon. She saved it for milestones, anniversaries, and rare nights when the house fell into a stillness that made conversation unnecessary. It was the kind of bottle you open when you want to mark a memory. And that night, Isobel poured it herself, her movements fluid, eyes unreadable. Clara had gone to a friend's place. The house was unusually quiet. No music, just the clink of glass and the echo of my own breathing. I remember noticing how still she was across the table, how deliberate her posture had become. Her wedding ring caught the light, but not the way it used to. Not like something worn out of pride. More like a prop she'd forgotten to remove before the curtain call. Then she looked at me and said, "I've been seeing Julian." Just like that. No build-up. No apology. No explanation padded with guilt or false softness. My brother. My younger brother. I didn't speak right away. In fact, I think I forgot how. My hand didn't shake. My mouth didn't twitch. What I felt wasn't rage. It was something quieter. A shift. A small tectonic movement beneath my ribs, like a steel beam cracking inside a high-rise no one else hears yet. She waited for a reaction. I gave her none. So she added, almost like she was reading a memo, "It's been going on for over a year." Then the knife. "We're in love." I asked one question. "Clara." She didn't blink. "She's coming with me." And then she added something so cruel, it didn't register until hours later. She says, "You've always felt more like a boss than a father." Julian listens. There it was. Not just betrayal. Substitution. She had taken my daughter. Not physically, not yet. But emotionally. Psychologically. I could already feel it. My daughter's loyalty, her love, her trust, transferred like a deed. One day she called me dad. The next, she called Julian safe. I sat back in my chair, the taste of wine turning to vinegar on my tongue. I looked at Isobel, her face suddenly unfamiliar, and thought, how long have you been planning this? Not the affair, the exit, the performance. She finished her glass. "I won't fight you in court if you don't contest custody. It's cleaner that way. For all of us. All of us." As if this was a boardroom negotiation and not the dissection of my life. 3 weeks later, the papers arrived. Isobel filed for divorce under irreconcilable differences. Julian submitted a guardianship petition for Clara, backed by a therapist's letter I'd never seen, suggesting Clara had emotional strain in my presence. The judge didn't blink. It was clean. I lost half my estate, my home, and the right to see my daughter outside supervised visitation. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I left the courthouse like a man walking out of his own funeral. Friends disappeared. Mutual acquaintances checked in once, then ghosted. Even my law firm partners grew distant, uncertain how to navigate the scandal. I was left in the hollow shell of my townhouse, staring at untouched bookshelves and photos no one wanted anymore. But I didn't spiral. I didn't drink. I didn't rage. I watched. I studied. And then I began the quietest war no one saw coming. I disappeared 2 months after the ink dried on the final judgment. No one noticed, not really. My name faded from firm correspondence, replaced by a polite statement about Martin Adler's sabbatical from law. Colleagues assumed I was grieving, or shamed, or both. Isobel moved into Julian's penthouse, and Clara followed shortly after. They threw a small engagement party, quiet, tasteful, efficient. I wasn't invited. Of course not. You don't invite the ghost of a man you've erased. But I was there. Outside. Across the street. Behind the tinted window of a black sedan. I watched my daughter wear a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That was the last time I allowed Martin Adler to feel anything. I left the city a week later under a new name, Caleb Dorn. Clean ID, new driver's license, a different state. I kept one duffel bag. No photos, no keepsakes, just locked texts, burner phones, and 2 USB drives. What I needed wasn't comfort. It was clarity. I rented a basement studio apartment in a crumbling Victorian walk-up, 3 hours from my former life. I bought a second-hand laptop, kept the camera covered with tape. My days were spent in courthouse archives. My nights in VPN-protected chat rooms where disgraced fathers, custody survivors, and legal ghosts traded war stories. Most of them were broken. I wasn't. I was building. First, I scrubbed Martin Adler. Bank accounts, subscriptions, online presence. I rerouted assets into LLCs through 4 states and 1 offshore shell. I burned old contacts and created new ones. Divorce mediators, private school clerks, real estate assistants, every one of them hired through fake recruiters I built from scratch. I knew Julian's weaknesses. I knew Isobel's. I knew their patterns. I wasn't their past. I was now their shadow. Next came the knowledge. I dug deep into family law loopholes, guardianship reversals, civil harassment petitions, asset tracing. But I didn't just study the law. I studied how people buried the truth. I built quiet tools. Bots that scraped social feeds for names, financial trackers that flagged account changes. I subscribed to Clara's school board newsletter under a fake parent alias. I joined Julian's business forum using an avatar from a dead contact of his. Every data point mattered. They weren't watching for me. Why would they? They thought I'd gone soft. But I had learned something far more valuable than revenge. I had learned how to make someone question everything they built. Without ever touching them, one by one, I began sewing threads into the fabric of their lives. I placed small cracks where no one would notice, at first. An anonymous complaint to the Department of Business Oversight about Julian's firm using insider advantage. A former tenant, review suggesting Isobel's boutique misrepresented luxury inventory. A leak to a high school administrator claiming Clara's father had falsified documents to gain custodial influence. Nothing illegal. Just enough truth to make denial sound like guilt. In the 5th month, Clara wrote a blog post, something for her senior project. It was about blended families and forgiving the people who couldn't grow with you. I read it 3 times. Then I logged off and stared at the wall for an hour. Because she wasn't writing about her mother. She was writing about me. And in her words, I wasn't cruel. I was weak. That was the final piece I needed. You can survive betrayal. You can rebuild from ruin. But being forgotten? That's what makes a man turn surgical. They say the most effective poison is the kind that doesn't taste like poison. It sips like wine, slow and warming, until the body collapses under the weight of what it thought was pleasure. That's how I began to dismantle them, drop by drop, without a sound. My first move was Julian's name. He had always wanted to outgrow me publicly, professionally. He styled himself as the cleaner Adler, the younger sibling who had charm instead of gravity, vision instead of burden. After I vanished, he swooped into consulting with a flair I found almost impressive. New offices, new deals, an absurd podcast called Built to Win. I listened to every episode. That's how I learned about his biggest client, a luxury condo developer with ties to 2 city officials and an unreported offshore subsidiary. Julian hadn't disclosed it on his conflict of interest paperwork. I anonymously forwarded the evidence to a business news outlet known for financial takedowns. They bit. The article ran 2 weeks later. Adler under scrutiny, questions rise over hidden interests. Julian called it a hit job. His client called it a liability. They dropped him quietly. Then 2 others followed. He started to sweat, just a little. Isobel tried to rally his PR. A new ad campaign. Rebranded messaging. That's when I dropped the 2nd seed. A quiet complaint to the IRS. Not an accusation, just a tip about misreported luxury inventory and suspicious vendor payments tied to her boutique. I routed it through a fake accountant's forum, buried among other minor complaints, knowing full well the algorithm would flag it. They opened a routine review. She called it a paperwork annoyance. I called it a crack in her glass. Clara, though, I moved slower with her. She was a teenager on the edge of adulthood. College applications. Identity questions. I didn't want to hurt her. I wanted her to see. So I began where she would look first, school. A concerned parent emailed her private school with rumors about a falsified therapist letter in her custody case. Nothing slanderous. Just enough to open an ethics review into the school counselor who had vouched for Julian during the petition years ago. The counselor resigned within a month. Clara received the letter in homeroom. She posted a cryptic message on her socials that afternoon. Nothing stays buried. Not even lies dressed as therapy. I read it once, then turned off my screen. Progress. At night, I sometimes sat in my apartment, watching clips of Clara as a child, laughing, dancing, shrieking when I lifted her into the air. Those moments still haunted me, but I didn't let them weaken me, because I had one more card left to play. A seed that had roots long before Julian, long before Isobel. DNA. I had obtained a sample of Clara's DNA years ago, when she was 10, after a routine medical test. At the time, it was nothing, just a precaution for health records. But I had stored it, along with my own. And after the divorce, after the betrayal, after the legal loss, I did the test. Clara wasn't biologically mine, and more importantly, she wasn't Julian's either. The results sat in a secure folder for 3 years. I checked them only once, then shut the file, knowing it would be the final thread I'd pull when the time was right. That time was approaching. Because while Julian and Isobel could lie, manipulate, and even replace me, they could not fabricate biology. They could not rewrite the truth inside her blood. And once Clara saw that, once she realized neither of them had told her, everything would unravel. Not because I said so, because the blood would. I mailed it on a Thursday. No return address, no signature, just a small envelope with a folded letter and a sealed lab report. It arrived on a Monday, delivered by hand to Clara's dormitory mailbox. The envelope was plain, but the contents were surgical. You don't know me, but I know you deserve the truth. The man who raised you wasn't your father by blood, and neither is the one you live with now. This isn't an opinion. It's science. DNA doesn't lie. Ask your mother about April 2004. Ask why she buried this. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. The lab results, printed clearly on a single sheet, told the rest. Probability of paternity, Martin Adler 0% probability of paternity, Julian Adler 0%. She didn't speak to anyone for 2 days. Not Julian. Not Isobel. Not even her roommate, who posted a concerned message about Clara going completely silent. But on the 3rd day, Clara texted Julian 5 words. Did you know the truth? He didn't answer her. I know because I intercepted the message. I had access to both of their phone logs through a shadow contact in a data firm Julian once bragged about securing. One of many small strings I pulled months ago, anticipating this moment. Isobel's reaction came next. A phone call to Clara. For minutes long. Then a second message. Don't believe everything you read. It's complicated. But it wasn't. It was precise. Measured. Irrefutable. She was not their blood. Not mine. Not his. A week later, Clara showed up at Isobel's boutique. Cameras caught nothing but her entering. Customers reported raised voices. One said she overheard the words, "lied to me for years, and you don't get to erase biology." That night, Clara deleted every public photo of her mother and Julian from her social media. Every single one. The captions were edited too. Family first became, be careful who names you. Grateful to be loved became, never again. She didn't post the report. But she didn't need to. The silence was its own verdict. I waited, not because I wanted praise, but because sometimes the deepest cut is the one you never admit to making. Clara began messaging one of my old friends, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years, Sarah, my former colleague, now a therapist. She asked questions about family structure, about grief, about rebuilding identity. She asked if it was possible to mourn someone who's still alive. Sarah didn't tell her I was still alive. Not yet. But she told me Clara was searching for origin, for something real. And now, for the first time, Julian and Isobel had nothing to offer her. Because you can't lie to DNA. You can't charm it. You can't override it with love or money or false smiles. And that was what I had waited for, not to see them scream, but to watch the illusion collapse quietly from the inside. 3 weeks later, Clara sent one message. No intro. No name. Just this. Are you really gone? Or did you let me go because you knew? I read it 3 times. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because the story wasn't over. There was still one visit left. And she would need to make it in person. She came alone. No entourage. No mother. No Julian. Just Clara, 20 years old now. Taller, sharper, older than the girl who once left me behind. She stood in front of the cafe where I'd asked Sarah to arrange our meeting. She wore black, like her mother always had during moments of confession, but she didn't inherit Isobel's poise. She had something harder in her eyes. Not cruelty, clarity. She spotted me instantly. I hadn't changed much. Older, leaner, but the same face. The same eyes she once called safe. She didn't hug me. She didn't cry. She sat. And the first thing she said was, "Why didn't you tell me you weren't my father?" I paused. Not for effect. For truth. Because you were. She looked away, jaw tightening. Her voice was brittle. But I wasn't yours. I leaned forward. No. But I was yours. Every scraped knee, every nightmare, every time you needed someone, I was there. That's fatherhood. Blood's just paperwork. She exhaled, not relief, not pain, exhaustion. Years of carrying a lie, now cracked open from both sides. I thought you hated me, she said quietly. No, then why did you vanish? Because if I stayed, they would have poisoned you against me completely. And if I fought, I'd lose anyway. So I did the one thing they didn't expect. What? I let go. So you could choose. One day. Freely. Not from guilt. From truth. She didn't speak for a while. And then, with a kind of restrained devastation I'd never heard in her voice, she asked the one question I dreaded. Do you think they ever loved me? I looked at her, and I gave her the only answer I had. I think they love the idea of you, but they love control more. She nodded slowly. Winter slid down her cheek. Not dramatic, just quiet, unstoppable. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope I'd sent weeks ago, the DNA report. She placed it on the table, between us. I thought this would tell me who I am, she whispered. But all it told me was who I'm not. You're not alone, I said. That's what you are. Her eyes flicked to mine, and something in her softened. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said. For disappearing. For letting them win. I didn't let them win, I replied. They just didn't know they lost until everything they'd built turned to ash. And now, I looked at her. At this table, they lost the only thing they couldn't replace. That night, she didn't come home to them. Julian called twice. Isobel sent a dozen messages. Clara ignored them all. Eventually, she posted one thing on her empty social page. He wasn't my father by blood. He just chose me. And never stopped. And that's enough. The likes came in slow, then steady. And somewhere across the city, Julian and Isobel watched the last ember of their carefully curated life flicker out. They had wealth, status, each other. But the one thing they stole from me, the thing they thought they owned, walked away from them by choice. And I didn't take her back. I didn't ask for anything. Because the most powerful kind of revenge isn't taking what someone loves. It's letting them live long enough to realize it never really belonged to them. If this story hit you deep, subscribe now. We tell stories where betrayal burns slow and revenge lands hard. One click, and you're part of the coldest payback on YouTube.